New Haven, Connecticut. August 1945. A woman walks into an FBI field office with no appointment and no evidence. She gives a made-up reason for being there. She is testing the water before she jumps. 11 weeks later, nobody has called her back. That delay very nearly buried the largest confession of Soviet espionage in American history. Because the woman standing in that doorway isn't a witness. She is the courier who has spent 7 years carrying stolen government secrets out of Washington in her purse. And she is about to hand the FBI a list of the people who gave them to her. Her name is Elizabeth Bentley. And by the time she finishes talking, the Cold War at home will have a face. The girl from New Milford. She does not look like anyone's idea of a spy. Born January 1st, 1908 in New Milford, Connecticut, to a straight-laced old-stock New England family, private school, a degree in modern languages from Vassar in 1930. The kind of woman raised to pour tea, not run networks. Vassar classmates remember someone quieter than that. Bright, isolated. A girl who struggled to make friends and never quite stopped looking for a cause bigger than herself. She takes that hunger to Florence, Italy for graduate study, and for a while in the early 1930s drifts toward the Italian fascists, drawn less to their politics than to their certainty. It doesn't last. By the time she returns to New York and later studies at Columbia, the target has flipped. Fascism becomes the enemy. Communism becomes the answer. In the mid-1930s, she joins the Communist Party USA, one face in a movement that a generation of young Americans have convinced themselves is the only serious response to depression and dictatorship. There is an earlier brush with espionage that almost happens and doesn't. Not long after she joins, Bentley is introduced to Juliet Stewart Points, a senior party figure secretly working for Soviet intelligence. Points tries to recruit her directly into the trade. Bentley hears what the job might actually require, including, she's told, using her own body as a tool of the work, and backs away. It is a warning she doesn't fully understand yet. This world asks for more than belief. It asks people to give up pieces of themselves they can't get back. She is, by every account, unremarkable inside the party, until October 15th, 1938, when she is introduced to a man named Jacob Golos. The courier. Golos is Russian-born, American naturalized, and unknown to almost everyone who deals with him socially. A career NKVD officer running a Soviet espionage front out of a New York travel agency called United States Service and Shipping Corporation. He recruits Bentley as his assistant. He becomes her lover, and slowly, deliberately, he turns her into something the party membership around her never suspects: an intelligence courier. By 1941, under the alias Helen Johnson, Bentley is making regular runs between New York and Washington, D.C. Weekly, sometimes twice weekly, collecting film and documents from government employees who believe they are helping a wartime ally and carrying them back to Golos. She isn't just a mailbox. She becomes Golos's closest aide, more deeply enmeshed in the actual running of the networks than her formal title suggests. And in Washington, those networks reach further than almost anyone in the FBI yet understands. The ring that matters most is the Silvermaster Group, built around Treasury and government economist Nathan Gregory Silvermaster. Bentley's couriered material out of that network comes from the Treasury Department and the Board of Economic Warfare, from a Pentagon office where a Silvermaster housemate photographs classified war production reports in a home darkroom, and through presidential aide Lauchlin Currie out of the White House itself. And there is one name bigger than the rest: Harry Dexter White, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, one of the chief American architects of the post-war Bretton Woods financial order. Documents linked to White's own Treasury work move through the Silvermaster Group and into Bentley's bag. Moscow gives her a code name that fits: Umnitsa. Clever girl, she earns it. Twice a week, sometimes more, she rides the train down from New York with material hidden in her bags and on her person, meets her sources in apartments and parked cars, and rides back the same night. No dead drops, no brush passes, no Tradecraft flourishes. Just a woman who looks like nobody in particular, doing something almost embarrassingly simple over and over for years, without getting caught. Her reach goes further than Treasury and the White House. Through a Soviet spy named Mary Price, Bentley is introduced to Duncan Lee, a Yale-educated Rhodes Scholar lawyer serving as the confidential senior assistant to General William Wild Bill Donovan, the man who runs the OSS, America's wartime intelligence service, and the direct ancestor of the CIA. Lee refuses to smuggle out paper. Too dangerous, too traceable. Instead, he memorizes what crosses Donovan's desk and repeats it to Bentley from memory, where the OSS counterintelligence has identified any communists inside its own ranks, which resistance groups in the Balkans are working against Soviet interests, even a stray reference to something secret happening at a place called Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Golos reports the recruitment back to Moscow with open delight, a senior aide to America's own spy chief, volunteering. It will make Duncan Lee, by later Venona identification, the most senior Soviet source the US ever confirms inside its own intelligence establishment. The night everything changes. Thanksgiving night, 1943. Jacob Golos dies of a heart attack. Bentley loses her handler, her lover, and, in a very real sense, the only person standing between her and Moscow's direct control. She grieves the way she has increasingly learned to grieve, by drinking heavily and often. For a while, party chief Earl Browder keeps her working. In early 1944, he puts her in contact with a second network, headed by War Production Board economist Victor Perlo, a group Bentley now runs alongside Silvermasters. For a few months, she is managing two of the most productive Soviet rings in the American government at once. It doesn't last. By late 1944, the NKVD has decided an American woman with a drinking problem is too great a liability to leave in charge of its most productive rings inside the US government. The Silvermaster Group and the Perlo Group are quietly taken away from her and handed to professional Soviet officers. Bentley resents it deeply. She has spent years building this. Now Moscow treats her like a courier again. Worse, like a loose end. Her new contact is Anatoly Gorsky, first secretary at the Soviet embassy in Washington and the local head of Soviet intelligence operations, codename ALL. And inside Moscow Center, in 1945, a darker conversation starts. An unstable American woman, cut loose from her networks, increasingly bitter, still holding everything in her head. What do you do with her? Gorsky reportedly floats poisoning her food. Moscow debates it and, in the end, does not act. Whether that hesitation saves her life or simply runs out the clock, no one can say with certainty. But Bentley, by every account, believes the threat is real. And that fear, layered onto grief, alcohol and resentment, is pushing her toward a decision no one in the NK5D sees coming. The walk-in. Historians still argue about what finally moves her. Bentley herself will later describe a moment of conscience, walking into a church and hearing, as she puts it, a voice telling her she must make amends. It's a tidy story. It's also, by her own well-documented habit of shaping the truth for effect, not the whole one. Paranoia about Soviet retaliation and a drinking problem spiraling out of control are just as present in the record as any voice in a pew. The truth is probably not one clean motive, but all of them at once. Whatever the mixture, in July 1945, she stops paying her party dues. In August, she walks into the FBI office in New Haven and announces, carefully, vaguely, that she used to work for a Soviet spy ring. It's a probe, not a confession. She's watching to see what happens if she talks. What happens is almost nothing. The FBI does not immediately grasp what has walked through its door. 11 weeks pass before New York follows up with a real interview. That delay looks worse than it is. The Bureau isn't starting from zero. It had already broken up the NKVD's senior officer in the country back in 1941, opened loose files on both Golos and Bentley, and been tracking Communist Party operatives closely since an anonymous tip reached Hoover's desk in August 1943. What's missing isn't awareness, it's urgency. Nobody yet understands that the woman in the New Haven file is sitting on the biggest confession the Bureau will ever receive. Then, in September 1945, on the other side of the world from Bentley, a cipher clerk named Igor Guzenko walks out of the Soviet embassy in Ottawa and defects to Canadian authorities, carrying proof of a Soviet atomic espionage network. Suddenly, Western counterintelligence is looking at Soviet infiltration with new urgency. Bentley's vague warning in New Haven stops looking like a loose thread and starts looking like a second confirmation of something much larger. On November 7, 1945, FBI agents sit down with Elizabeth Bentley for a full interview. This time she doesn't hold back. Codenamed Gregory by the Bureau, she lays out 7 years of courier work in exhaustive detail, dates, routes, drop procedures, and starts naming names. Her formal deposition eventually identifies dozens of individuals as Soviet sources. Over the following months and years, as she's debriefed again and again, the number she claims grows further still. Historians differ on the precise count at each stage, but by any accounting, it is one of the largest single unmaskings of an intelligence network in American history. Nathan Silvermaster, Victor Perlow, Harry Dexter White, Lauchlin Currie, William Remington. Names that will define the next decade of American political life, and Bentley has given the FBI every one of them from memory, with nothing to trade for it but her own freedom from prosecution. The scorched earth. Word travels faster than anyone in Washington expects, and not through a leak in Washington at all. J. Edgar Hoover shares a summary of Bentley's deposition with British intelligence liaison William Stevenson. Somewhere in that chain of paperwork sits a British officer named Kim Philby, secretly a Soviet asset himself. On December 4, 1945, Philby cables Moscow with a warning. The courier called Myrna has talked. The effect is immediate and total. Moscow Center orders its officers to sever contact with every source Bentley could identify, deny any relationship with her, destroy documents, and pull intelligence officers out of the country. Whatever material evidence once existed to corroborate her word is gone within weeks, deliberately and systematically erased before the FBI can lay a hand on it. This is the cruelest irony of the entire case. Bentley hands the Bureau the single most detailed account of Soviet penetration of the US government ever given by a defector. And the very act of receiving it through a compromised intelligence sharing channel guarantees that almost none of it can ever be proven in a courtroom. In 1947, a grand jury reviews her testimony and declines to indict. No documents, no corroboration. Just one woman's word against the silence of everyone she named. For the Truman administration, the whole affair is an unwelcome complication rather than a triumph. A sitting president does not want a story about dozens of Soviet agents inside his own government, especially one he cannot prove and cannot fully bury. For the FBI, it's the opposite, an intelligence windfall it cannot yet spend. Two institutions sit on the same secret for entirely different reasons, and for 2.5 years, neither one lets it out. The Red Spy Queen. For 2.5 years, Bentley's confession sits mostly buried, known to the FBI, known to a handful of officials, unknown to the country. Then, in the spring of 1948, low on money and increasingly desperate for the record to become public in her own words, she takes it to a reporter at the New York World Telegram. She is paid for the story. It runs, sensational and overheated, under a phrase the papers will hang around her neck for the rest of her life. The Red Spy Queen. The timing is not an accident. By 1948, the country's mood has shifted hard. The Berlin blockade is choking off a divided city. A communist-backed civil war is tearing through Greece. The wartime image of the Soviet Union as an awkward ally is gone, replaced by something closer to an enemy. A story that might have been dismissed as paranoid fantasy in 1945 lands 3 years later, on ground that has been thoroughly prepared to believe it. In July and August of 1948, she testifies publicly before the House Un-American Activities Committee, seated across from a panel that includes a young congressman named Richard Nixon. Days later, a former Time editor named Whittaker Chambers echoes much of her story from his own vantage point. And together the two confessions ignite what one historian calls a national obsession with the hunt for hidden communists. Some of what Bentley says under oath does not hold up. Investigators find inconsistencies. Details shift between tellings. Critics, not unreasonably, point out that a woman being paid for her story has an incentive to make it bigger. It is, without question, the shakiest chapter of her credibility. And then, 2 years after her HUAC testimony, the other half of the story arrives. Quietly, classified, and from a source Bentley never knows exists. The proof she never saw. At Arlington Hall in Virginia, Army codebreakers working a top-secret program called Venona have spent years chipping away at intercepted Soviet cable traffic from the 1940s. Analyst Meredith Gardner and FBI liaison Robert Lamphere begin decrypting messages that reference agents by cover name Robert, jurist, Page, Myrna. Cross-referenced against Bentley's 1945 deposition, the cover names align with the people she named years earlier, in a room with no recorder and no documents, working purely from memory. Silvermaster, White, Currie, herself, names she gave the FBI before any of this decrypted traffic existed to confirm them. Historians John Earl Haynes and Harvey Clare will later conclude that Venona substantially validates Bentley's core account, even where individual details of her testimony wobble. What cannot be validated, what may never be fully settled, is intent. Did Harry Dexter White knowingly hand material to a spy ring built around his own friend Nathan Silvermaster? Or did the documents move through subordinates without his direct knowledge? The Venona traffic ties material to his circle. It does not by itself put the decision in his hand. Historians remain split on that exact question to this day. Consequences. The human cost of Bentley's confession lands in stages. Within the government, the immediate fallout is quiet. Officials she named quietly lose their positions, or are eased out over the following months, as loyalty concerns spread through Washington's federal agencies. Harry Dexter White appears before HUAC himself in August 1948, denies every accusation under oath, and dies of a heart attack 3 days later, before anyone can question him again, and long before Venona will make his position so much harder to defend. William Remington is convicted of perjury for denying party membership. Bentley testifies as a government witness at his trial, and more consequentially, at the espionage trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, where her account of Soviet penetration helps frame the case for the jury. The Rosenbergs are executed in 1953. Not everyone folds the way Remington does. When Bentley names Duncan Lee before HUAC in August 1948, Lee doesn't plead the fifth like so many others. He denies everything, flatly and publicly, and calls her a liar motivated by personal spite. Donovan's old OSS network closes ranks around him, and the Washington establishment largely takes his side over hers. It works. Lee goes to his grave in 1988 still denying it. Only after his death does a declassified Venona identification place him inside the OSS under the cover name Coke. The very story Bentley told in 1945, finally confirmed decades after nobody was left to prosecute it. Was that sentence proportionate to what the Rosenbergs actually did? Even historians convinced of their guilt, a guilt Venona traffic later corroborates, have long debated whether the death penalty fit the crime, or whether Bentley's testimony and the political climate her confession helped ignite pushed the country toward an outcome the facts alone might not have demanded. And for every name that ends in a courtroom, there are dozens more who never see one. Not because they're innocent, but because the law itself runs out first. Espionage prosecutions carry a short statute of limitations, and Bentley's information, however accurate, describes activity that in most cases is already too old to charge by the time Venona can finally back it up. Guilt, in this case, and legal consequence turn out to be two almost entirely separate questions. The verdict: Judge Elizabeth Bentley by outcome alone, and the case looks unambiguous. Dozens of Soviet sources identified inside the US government years before Venona could prove any of it, at a moment when almost no one in Washington wanted to believe it was true. Judge her by method, and the picture gets harder to defend. A paid informant, a witness whose numbers grew with each retelling, a woman whose personal credibility was so damaged by 1948 that even people who believed her underlying story flinched at putting her on a witness stand. Both things are true at once. That is the uncomfortable inheritance of the Bentley case. A confession that was substantially accurate and persistently unreliable, delivered by a woman capable of both extraordinary courage and habitual exaggeration. And Washington never quite figured out how to hold those two facts together. Just look at what happened with the two men she named who reacted most differently. Remington convicted, Lee vindicated in his own lifetime and only quietly proven wrong after he could no longer answer for it. The same witness. Two completely different verdicts, decades apart. A warning from history. Unlike Oleg Penkovsky, who died for what he gave the West, Elizabeth Bentley survived what she gave the FBI, and paid for it in a slower currency. Fame, then infamy, then irrelevance. She publishes a memoir, Out of Bondage, in 1951. Tours as a professional ex-communist witness for a while, and then the invitations stop coming. By the last years of her life, she is working as a language instructor at a girls' reform school in Middletown, Connecticut. A quiet, almost anonymous ending for a woman once called the Red Spy Queen on the front page of a New York paper. The years between are not kind. Her drinking worsens, driving offenses pile up, a string of relationships with men who treat her badly. Financial strain, even as she tries to keep touring and testifying to pay the bills. The FBI itself grows tired of a witness whose retellings never quite match. And by the mid-1950s, the demand for the Red Spy Queen has all but dried up. She dies on December 3, 1963 in a New Haven hospital at 55. The papers barely notice. What Elizabeth Bentley teaches isn't really about spying. It's about what happens to the people who tell an uncomfortable truth badly, who are right about the essential facts and unreliable about almost everything around them. History eventually vindicates her core account. History never quite forgives her for how she delivered it. Next time on Tradecraft. Norway, July 1973. A team of foreign agents is watching a man they believe is one of the most dangerous terrorists in Europe. The architect, they're convinced, of a massacre that shocked the world less than a year earlier. They are wrong about who he is. And a woman on that team is about to be arrested for a killing that was never supposed to happen, in a country that was never supposed to be the target. Her name is Sylvia Raphael. And what goes wrong in a small Norwegian town will haunt an intelligence service for a generation. Next time on Tradecraft.